we are back and we're moving into our first conversation for this morning. This is a part of our COVID-19 update brought to you by Full Tech Systems Limited. And one of the clear impacts that we know that the pandemic has caused across the globe is just how many businesses have been impacted, some devastated by shutdowns, lockdowns, state of emergencies, restricted movements, whatever you want to call it. But since we have reopened, it's a time for businesses to start to look at how they will be able to recover and assess the impact that it has caused. So we're going to be talking to a representative from the Belize Indian community. Dinesh Bhujwani is with us, and he's going to tell us all about his approach and his take on what's been taking place with businesses. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, Marlene. Morning, Gavin. Morning, Belize. How are you guys doing?
We're good, yeah. Definitely happy to see that we're still not seeing new cases and that things, although very different, are somewhat returning to normalcy.
Yes, we should be very thankful for that, indeed.
Yeah. So Dinesh, let's just start off by finding out, so you have several businesses. You have, of course, your grocery store downtown, but you also have your business complex here at the Northern Plaza. And so you've seen kind of both ends of how the shutdown and the state of emergency can affect businesses. Can we start with that, your own assessment?
Exactly. It's been interesting. We have, like you said, we've been at both ends of the spectrum with the grocery store business. Initially, when this first hit, we saw that surge in purchasing and stockpiling of groceries and toilet paper and all the likes. So we got that end of it, which was good. And as part of that business, a well-worked store, we are also a pantry provider for the government of Belize. And so in that light, we've been fairly busy as well. As far as the northern shops have been concerned, for I'd say the entire part of the lockdown, all the businesses were closed. I don't think any of them fit into the category, in any of the categories that were allowed to be open, and so it affected them. So yesterday, I think for a lot of them, it was a great respite from this, that they were able to come out and open their business. Yeah. And I wish them well. I hope that they can go back. I know all the businesses are not going to go back to full capacity, and that's unfortunate. But I think a lot of the businesses are very happy. Business owners, I can tell you, a lot of the business owners downtown are very happy that they were allowed to open their stores for business.
Yeah. Well, we had a bit of miscommunication there over the weekend with clothing stores, and we know that the Belize Indian community definitely kind of dominate that market downtown. What's been their response in not having any business activity for over a month?
It's obviously, I mean, it's like any business owner, if you have no revenue, but yet a lot of them have. If they don't necessarily own the establishment they're at, they have rents. They have some of them have actually have kept on their employees at half salaries. So it's been, the expenses are still there. You have your own personal expenses. You have other expenses. So expenses have not, for all intents and purposes, have not necessarily shifted downwards, but the revenues have come to a standstill. So for a lot of them, it was very difficult, and they were very happy. I think that whole miscommunication on Saturday was unfortunate, but I think that part of it was, it's very difficult in this lockdown, and I sympathize with government in trying to change SIs and trying to change these regulations as they go along. And I think it was just an unfortunate situation where they had not identified these stores they didn't sort of capture them in any sort of category that would have allowed them to open. And then there was some miscommunication. I know there was people interpretations of the SI came into play as well. And so that sort of had a bit of confusion as to what stores were allowed to open, what were not allowed to open. And I think that got cleared up with a little bit of dialogue between the community and government. And all of them were asked to just be patient for a couple more days. And then they were allowed to open yesterday, which everybody was quite happy.
Yeah.
And how has it been you know, just having had a business that, you know, was in operation during the lockdown, how was it keeping the doors open and keeping stuff on the shelves and managing the persons who were coming in and maintaining, you know, the social distancing guidelines and ensuring that people did comply? How was it how was that experience like as a business owner? Was it difficult to make the adjustments in this time, or did it sort of run smoothly?
It was interesting. I wouldn't say it was difficult. It was definitely interesting. It was definitely a challenge. It sort of goes against the norms of what we are all used to. We're a very sociable culture. Everybody, you know, and so it's very difficult to then say to everybody, okay, look, you guys, you have to kind of keep your distance. You have to do this. And so, but it's. I think once now that people understand how important, how having operated under those guidelines that we are where we are today, having almost no cases of COVID at this moment. I think people now understand and appreciate the fact that that was a necessity, and people are adhering to it. Yes, of course, like anything else, you're going to have one or two people that feel that they don't need to, and those people kind of get the gist after a while. As far as supply chain is concerned, oddly, we haven't had any issues with supply chain. As you know, the ports are still open. There's still some, you know, there's still trade taking place. So there's no issue with supply chain other than products that were in high demand, you know, sanitizer and disinfectants and stuff like that. But I think that's just as it is, and that was an issue, not so much in Belize, but that was an issue also in the US. And so that has now, I would like to believe, to some degree, starting to come on track. And I think within the next couple of weeks, you'll see that most stores will have those things like sanitizers and disinfectant sprays and all. And the thing is, I think there's some coming from different countries. Before, I think primarily we got them from the U.S. Now you see them coming from, I think, Guatemala and different other places. So I think people are just being creative in how they source their products. I mean, look, you see people in Belize. And going back to that is that I think this new norm has created opportunity for a lot of people, and people have stepped up to the plate. I mean, you look at, I think Travelers was doing their sanitizers. I think a couple of other people are manufacturing sanitizers. So this has created an environment in which people are and we are a fairly adaptable, resilient community as far as the business community, and just in Belize on a whole.
Now, if you were to perhaps look at the different ways that businesses have been impacted. I mean, clearly there's a loss of revenue, but there's also issues with staff retainment and sometimes having to put them, you said some of them on half salary, some are on less. What would you say was the biggest challenge, and how did the employers, especially from the Indian community, approach what they would do with this staff?
I think everybody it wasn't a one-size-fits-all approach to it. I think some people who had various businesses, like there are some people who were in the wholesale business that were still supplying to essential services. So they, for the most part, kind of kept their staff maybe on at different, less hours for the week, and then staggered them throughout the week. I know some people kept some of their staff but paid them half salary, which unfortunately then puts them in a situation where those employees cannot benefit from some of the other programs that are out there for them too. So it's kind of a tricky tightrope that you have to walk both as an employee and an employer. What do you want out of it at the end of the day? And so, and then there are a lot of people that had to let their staff go. Unfortunate as it is, they maybe smaller. I think some of the smaller operations had to do that. I think some of the bigger operations kept their staff at half salary. And like I said earlier, some of the ones that had some semblance of business kept some of their staff, but kept them on less hours and staggered schedule.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I know the Chamber spoke of very early on into the state of emergency was looking at planning for business continuity. You know, on a personal note for you, or even with the other business owners, was that a part of your action plan, and how effectively would you say you would have executed it?
Honestly, I don't think anyone ever planned for this or ever could have planned for this.
Yeah.
I think this took everybody by surprise, every industry, by surprise. And so I think to look at it, but what it has done, I think, is to allow for businesses and for people and for Belizeans in general, is to look at what's possible, even if you were to look at it, a natural disaster or some sort of crisis, these things are possible. So I think we need to look at business, we need to adapt. I think the environment, the world itself, and I think this is just going to accelerate adoption to certain types of businesses faster. I think the longer we stay in this holding pattern, we are going to see the norms that exist today become almost permanent. So I think things like where you see new businesses popping up with online delivery and online platforms that allow for that, I think you're going to see where that is going to become the norm. And if social distancing becomes a thing where when you go out, you can't really be together, I think you're going to find that people are going to sort of bring that social life to the house, to the home. And from that will spur different industries that you see prevalent in a lot of other countries. I think our adoption of e-commerce and sort of the electronic medium in which we do business is going to definitely accelerate in this type of environment.
Yeah, there was definitely a forced innovation that took place, and many people, I think, had stayed away from e-commerce because they just thought that perhaps it wouldn't take off, it wouldn't be reliable, but the experience during the state of emergency proved otherwise. But there are things now that businesses are going to be, or they are mandated to enforce, and there are those are social distancing guidelines, so the 6 feet apart, proper markers, people wearing masks. Talk to me about enforcing that. So you have, for example, the grocery store, Wellworth store. So you have to look at what capacity of people who can come into the building, all of these things. Explain it to me.
Well, you definitely have a capacity issue, and most businesses will have that. I think the demand for your product and the demand for or services that you have will drive your revenue streams regardless, right? I think that, but how like anything else, for the consumer experience, and although these guidelines are set in place and are need to be enforced, I think part of the process, again, like anything else, is how do you treat your customers during that time? So if they have to wait outside, how do you make it as
comfortable,
as convenient and comfortable for them? Do we now change the way we have, how do we deal with the customers waiting outside? How do we deal with them that's inside? Yes, your capacity is going to definitely be affected, but I think part of the process is to rethink it and now what you thought was the right customer experience, how can you then make it as comfortable for that customer? Because your revenue stream will be pushed by demand and what your products and services and how well you offer them and how easily you offer them to the consumer. And I think part of building on that revenue would be to then look at the consumer and say, okay, well, you don't like to come and stand in line, or you don't like to how do I get the product to you? And that again comes right back down to that experience of e-commerce and being able to offer that service or pick up, or a lot of businesses have already started to adapt to pick up, curbside pickup, which was something that was sort of being touted in a lot of other countries, and it was I think it wasn't being adapted quite as rapidly as they thought. But I think now with this, you have an accelerated adoption of that, and that's going to happen in Belize as well with all industries. I mean, you see it in the restaurant industry, you see it, and people are going to get used to it. And I think restaurants and all these others will also have to adapt to that environment, and might have to downsize the size of their eating capacity and all that, and then build on infrastructure that's geared towards delivery and takeout.
Yeah.
And speaking of demand for products, with everything that's happened, of course, the business community is going to be affected by anything that sort of happens externally. And one of the big issues that has been coming up has been the devastation of the tourism industry with the lack of travel and travel restrictions and the border being closed. And I'm wondering, it might be kind of early to tell, but I'm wondering if you have seen any sort of effect that that's had, whether or not, whether it's from a decrease in sort of businesses from, tourists coming themselves, but also the lack of, well, people who made their livelihoods from tourism now, don't have, don't have jobs, or they don't have as much money. And then, of course, that does apply to several other, industries and sectors. So I'm wondering if you've noticed any sort of, if you've noticed if any significant impacts that we're already starting to see because of that.
100%. I think you find that if you look at, let's look at the cruise ship industry. You have the tour guides, the taxi drivers, the hair braiders, the waitresses, all those people who then make their money off of their livelihood off of that industry, and then in turn come and spend that in our stores and in our restaurants and all these other places. And so, of course, obviously they've seen zero income. And so that is, of course, is going to affect business on a whole different level. But on a more long-term thing, that one of the things that we're going to be seeing is the scarcity of foreign exchange. Mm-hmm. I think that's something that we all have to figure out. Even from a business perspective, now that we have this scenario and we see that it's going to be, I think one of the industries that we have to look at, several industries, is how do we look at businesses that are resilient to some degree to these types of crises, to even climate resiliency as well, so that you can then have this sort of uninterrupted stream of foreign exchange. Whether it's, and I think there are certain industries that we maybe took for granted that we could really build on. So I see that as kind of the way forward. I don't think tourism will ever be, it might be down for a little bit, but we have such an amazing product, a beautiful product. I don't think we're very unique in that way. So I think people will come back. I don't ever think that's ever going to be a problem. Yeah. But I think looking at this situation, you have to be able to say, what are the things that we can do both in private sector and public sector to say, government creating the enabling environment and private sector creating the products and the services to be able to have to at least prop up that foreign exchange issue.
Yeah. And we know, well, let's hope with the BPOs now resuming some of their work that may be of some assistance as well. I want to take it back to another issue, and that really just boils down to safety. We're here because there is a virus that the world is trying to understand and to grapple with, that can cause people to lose their lives. So when you have a store, and especially grocery stores, where your workers are there as frontline persons interacting with people all day long, how do you ensure that you are keeping them in as safe a possible environment as possible?
Well, so it goes back to making sure that the individuals coming into your space, so you have this space that you create a safe space, whether it's through proper sanitization, yeah, cleaning, making sure they all have gloves and masks and they've changed it on a regular basis, and that the store itself is a clean space, which we were doing from before. I mean, in that sense. The next thing is then how do you then ensure that the individuals coming into your store, into that space, are both protected and themselves, but at the same time we're protecting our staff and management from those people. So again, social distancing, making sure that they're wearing masks, washing their hands before they enter the store, giving them sanitizers and alcohol before they enter the store, wiping down counters. I mean, without actually it was funny because I saw somewhere where someone put up these sneeze guards and all this stuff. And I don't know, I've always been a strong proponent of putting up anything in front of your customer that creates that sort of barrier between your customer and yourself. Yeah. But you can't really do it throughout the entire store because it's, you're interacting. We're a service to some degree because we're offering a product, we're still offering a service, right? Yeah. You need to tend to the customer. You need to do that. So there's now we've done some training on a basic level to how do you speak to a customer without sort of invading their space, because you might have people who aren't overly concerned about the fact that you're foot away from them or 2 feet. And then you have customers who want you to stay as far away from them as possible.
Yeah.
And so you have, and how do you then juggle between those two extremes and create and still provide the right service that you want to your customer?
Yeah. So
I think that's the, sorry.
no, I think I wanted to just follow up and ask if you have seen a sense from the public that you've been serving that they take it seriously as well.
Again, it's the same scenario. I think I would say if I were to put a percentage on it, I think 85% take it very seriously and are very concerned. I think there's always 15%, and that's tends to be who just really don't care. Some of them feel that they've taken all the they've taken all the medication or drank all the rum they can, and they don't. Everything's fine. There's people who think that that this is never going to happen. See, it's all this big hoax. There's always these people that are going to. There's no need. There's really no need for us to be doing this. We should have opened up a long time ago. This is complete bogus. So you have those people, and it's just trying to figure out how to, and they've had their minds made up about this a long time ago. So to sit there and try to convince them otherwise, other than saying, and now I guess, and this is one of those things where you have to mandate a lot of this stuff in order to protect the 85% from those 15%.
Yeah.
And are there, one of the best, I think we had brought it up earlier, one of the easiest parallels to draw between something like this is sort of the preparedness that has to take place for a natural disaster. And because we, for example, live in an area that's prone to hurricanes, a lot of businesses and people in general have contingency plans or safety plans for what to do in the event of a hurricane. And there's established safety, guidelines. Something like this happens now. Are there conversations being had about, what if this happens again? Or because, there's no vaccine for COVID-19 and we're looking at, possible measures that may have to be in place for a long time. So are there conversations about that, about what's going to have to be long-term and what's going to be permanent and what is going to be sort of emergency plans always?
I think that the difference, I think, between this and a natural disaster like a hurricane is that has a sort of a finite moment that we can kind of prepare for. I think this is very different in that it's difficult to predict, like you said, what's going to happen 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. Is it going to come back again? How hard is it going to come back? A lot of that is, so I think, yes, I think every business, every serious business is having that conversation. We've had it. And then it goes back to what I said earlier is I think you will now have to figure out how do you get those goods and services to the consumer. And I think even if we remain at this level where we have no patience with this with COVID, and we are in an environment in which we have to maintain social distancing for a while, and we still have the mask, I think people are going to find coming out to be somewhat inconvenient, and so they're going to want you to bring those goods and services to them. And I think that's going to become, there's going to be I'm not someone that likes to do online shopping or anything like that. I'm a touchy-feely person. I want to pick up the stuff, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that are like that. But a lot of people are, I'm sure, finding going shopping right now to be highly inconvenient, very tedious. All of these, they don't want to. They don't, although it's the norm and they understand the safety of it, they just don't like it. So I think as a business, you're going to have to adapt, and that's not going. And I think that's going to happen regardless. I think that's just going to become the natural way that businesses are going to go. I think you're going to see a lot more online presence of these businesses. I think you're going to see delivery services are going to thrive to some degree because of it. And I think that's just going to be the norm regardless. I don't see that changing. I don't see that trajectory being set off course by any stretch of the imagination at this point.
I think that one thing that is very clear is that nothing will go back to what it was in February 2020, and that includes businesses. There's certain things that are just permanently changed, and it can be from what our new shopping experience will be like to even how we move around at this time. And when you talk about planning for emergencies, one of the very real possibilities is that we end up in another lockdown phase or with more restricted movements before the end of this year, next month, 2 months from now, depending on what happens in terms of detection. Do you, at this time, start thinking for that eventual phase again? What are you going to do if they do have to lock down the city again?
Right. Well, from a standpoint of the business, the supermarket, the grocery business, we have already started to build a structure for pickup and for online delivery. We're still working on that because it's just a matter of putting all the products onto a platform. So we are looking at it from that point. I think there are a lot of the larger businesses are doing it.
Yeah.
The problem I think we have is we have a lot of small businesses.
Yeah.
And how do we then get those small businesses who might not have the wherewithal to do it to be able to participate in that environment? And I think this is an opportunity for many individuals to say, okay, how do we then create a space that small businesses can participate in and I think there are a couple out there. I think someone like Belize who's I think been the leader in that space to some degree, at least from a local standpoint. How do you take that or some iteration of that to be able to then allow small businesses to participate in that exercise? Because a lot of them are not going to have the wherewithal to be able to do that. And so it's how do you get that experience or those goods and services to the individuals who want it, whether it's in a lockdown or even now. Yeah. And so I think there's opportunity there for businesses. And like I said earlier, this is going to create opportunity for many individuals. And I think if you're someone who's tech savvy and you're out there, I think there's never been a prime time in Belize for this sort of technology innovation environment. There's never been a time that's been better. Sad to say it took this to get to that, but this is what it is.
Well, it's all of us. You're joining us via Skype this morning, so it does show that the things that we thought wouldn't work definitely could. I want to get your perspective, Dinesh. When you spoke of the business owners and their perspectives when they had to be closed for the past month, we'd been hearing for quite some time two messages. One was lock down the country, don't allow any movement. And then as soon as people realized the implications of it, everyone started saying, well, open up the country. And business owners clearly have a different perspective because if you're not open, you're not making money, you can't pay your people, and you can't take care of your own personal debt. What are your thoughts on the current schedule of reopening?
I think, so I'm conflicted to some degree, and I think most business owners are. I think for the most part, you want this, your love of country and your love of your people and love of your family kind of, you would then steer towards the point of like, lock everything down, it's safe. I think a lot of businesses, prior to even the lockdown, I think there were a lot of people even in the Indian community that closed their businesses before they were mandated to. And so I think that safety issue was there. I think like you rightly said, once you're in that environment and you start to realize how it affects your business. And I think a lot of that tune changed when we saw that there wasn't really a lot. We didn't have a lot of cases and it was managed fairly well. And we're in a situation where, thankfully, we are where we are. And so I think then as a business owner, I said, I think people's perspective was, well, okay, everything seems to be fine. We seem to have everything okay. I think we can open. Of course, I have my reservations, but it's hard. Like I've mentioned to several people, I kind of reserve. I've kept out a lot of these conversations because for all intents and purposes, I've been open throughout this ordeal. Mm-hmm. And so for me to then make comment on whether or not someone should open, everybody's situation is different. Yeah. And so I know as a business owner, if I was closed, and we have a couple of businesses that are closed and it's adversely affected the business. So I could see where opening would be a huge relief to that specific business. Yeah. So I can see where they're coming from. I think that I think if we manage what my biggest peeve is I think it's important that for people to understand that internally and domestically we're good, but it just takes one selfish individual going across the border illegally or going somewhere illegally or trying to cross a family member or illegally or any of that type of behavior that can just take this into a whole different, take it to a whole different level that can be catastrophic for Belize. And so I think it's important that people understand that. And the problem with it is that human nature will be as soon as you give a little bit, people are just gonna, you're just gonna go, you know, there's gonna be that crowd that's just gonna wanna go, you know, crazy, right? They wanna, oh, we have freedom, let's do this. So I think as long as people we can get people to understand that, yes, we're open, everything's good, you maintain your social distancing, still make sure that hygiene, I think that's part of the process as well, is that we make it the norm to practice some of the what they say is stringent hygiene method, but really should have been normal anyway. These are things that you should be doing regularly, washing your hands, you know, keeping surfaces clean regardless. Just in general, that should have been something we were practicing before this all happened. But outside of that, I think being able to say, think before you do things like, and the border has always been a contentious issue for me, and that's a whole different program that we had. But I think now more than ever, it's a very critical time for people to understand that you are not, yes, I understand you probably want to go across and do some business and all that stuff, but at the end of the day, you are risking the lives of not only yourself, but your family and your friends. And that's something that people have to really, really understand. Look, I think there's people who argue that, oh, my kids are abroad, I need to bring them back, I need to do this. I haven't seen my kids for several months now, and it hurts, but I think part of it is that you have to understand that there's a bigger picture. You cannot be selfish about it. You have to understand that there's a larger, there's something larger at stake, and people have to. And I think is once we can grasp that as a country and as a people, we'll be fine. I think the opening now, as long as that part, I think is critical in all of this, so that we don't import. As you can see, I think for the most part, none of it was what all the cases we had were for all intents and purposes imported. And so I think and as an importer, I shouldn't really be speaking, but all joking aside, I think it's important that we look at that as a people and make sure we don't have that, we don't make that mistake.
I think the message that you're sharing is such a critical one because, you know, essentially, one of the things that we do have to remember, while the novelty of the pandemic has worn off, it doesn't mean that the measures that we were very extreme about in the beginning should discontinue. We have to stay vigilant, and our individual actions are really a part of a collective effort. You know, anyone falters, then we're all at risk.
Yeah, then we back down to lockdown, we're back to all these things. Another thing I want to, if you don't mind, I'd like to take this to another trajectory. I think one of the things, as we go back to I know you said we will never go back to what was the norm, but as we go back to what we think is fairly normal and moving around, one of the things that has happened in this is that we've seen, whether it's through government's assistance programs, whether it's through NGOs, whether it's through communities giving back to people and trying to help those who've been affected by this. I think one of the things that we all have to look at, and whether it's government or even private individuals, is when you give, don't just give, take a picture and walk away and say, okay, I did what I needed to do. I think it's important to understand that some of these people have fallen through the cracks and are in that situation, not only because of COVID, but because of many other things. That we have certain issues in society for whatever reason. And those people were not able to be part of a program because we have an informal economy in some instances. They weren't part of a thing. And so those people were affected and have been affected and will continue to be affected, not because of COVID or anything else, but just because of the way, in some instances, they were marginalized. In some instances, they had there were other issues within our society. And I think it's important for us not only when we give to say, oh, I gave and walk away and feel good about yourself, but to say, okay, why was that individual? Was that individual just there because if they lost their job because of COVID, or did they fall through these cracks and weren't part of any program because of something else? And if we can better that situation in some way, then I think we will be better off because of something that's so horrible.
That's one spin-off change I think we can all be comfortable with. Clearly, many people realized that there were Belizeans in this country who were simply not in a position to be able to maintain themselves or to be able to cover the costs of just the basic needs. And we saw many communities, including the Indian community, stepping forward to kind of help to fill that gap. And we do hope that when things do settle to whatever it settles to, that we don't lose sight of that issue as well. I want to ask just a personal question. I think that all of us collectively over the past month have had different experiences. And we all kind of have that one moment where you realize that, wow, this is really surreal and this is really just something I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. From your perspective, what was that moment for you?
When I couldn't be with my son on his birthday, and I know I won't be with my daughter on her birthday, so that's kind of surreal.
Yeah.
That you realize that the importance of all of that in your life.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of us will be feeling that on Mother's Day this weekend too. So that's one we can all connect with. Dinesh, any final words just on behalf?
I guess you're you're technically not allowed to go see politics. Guys, all these rules and things have been put in place. They're there for a reason. They're there to keep us safe. I just ask that everybody kind of adhere to them as best as they can. And it's really looking out for your loved ones when you're doing this, looking out for our country at the end of the day. And hopefully we can go back later on at some point when this is all said and done to something that's a little bit more normal, or what we consider normal, but this is our norm. Embrace it, make it work, make it count, and just appreciate the people around you and your loved ones, and wash your hands and disinfect and keep your mouth and nose covered. Outside of that, nothing else.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing your perspective this morning, and we appreciate you joining us. Stay safe.
All right. Take care. Bye. Have a great day, guys.
Okay. Bye. There you have it. That was our COVID-19 update looking at business recovery, specifically for the the Belizean Indian community, and quite a lot to take in there. But I think what is crucial is that we do remember that while some businesses are open, it's under very different circumstances now. But that's actually a great segue for our next segment. So there are new things that you're going to have to implement in your businesses if you're going to be open. And so we're going to be talking to the managing director of Belize Signs Limited about where you can get these things and how they're helping. That's coming up after the break, so stay tuned.
This COVID update was brought to you by Fulltech Systems, your technology center, where you'll come for the price, but stay for the service.